The cat trees. At breakfast, the boiler broke again. The system did not allow for effective communication between technicians, and so each day a new one came. She woke her sister up. Small bird hopped, hopping again through what had become very old in her sister's room. A whole day of their certificate on the fridge with the wrong information on it. It had not been checked properly. Her sister shook her curls from her sleep. Someone had built her bedroom around a boiler at 8:30 in the morning. She left the small bird to the expressions of her folklore and washed her bowl in cold water. British Gas argued with itself over the phone, powerless at this time. The date would not change. She closed the window, trying to quiet the buzzing outside. They were trying to take the sycamore down. Things were not as they should be. The tree brought the hovering woodpeckers to the morning. The morning brought Friary Road to its ears, pressed lightly to what shifted in the cold. It cannot be changed in disagreement, nor could it sit in reason, the tinkering of its cultured effects. Tailor falling, tall click of felling, tall voice of air over the road. It must be the garden silence. Someone must have hired it. She faced the theatre of these things, their ability to measure her, the front door. She sat and blew the bug from the window before she closed it. She was not ready to text her friend back. Touched, tidied slowly, Twitter. Yesterday trembled again in drifting thrill of the small bird. The night before, she sat with her friend. It might take days to bring this tree down, and the days would wake her. Bad posture's terrific fugue. She shifted in the wooden chair behind the pianist. She folded her arms in the queue outside and glanced in the window. She had arrived early. There had been no hot water for 3 days, and no technician could get hold of the right parts to fix the boiler, and so there was only the wing-limbed blue ciphers occupying the form to verify the status of things, their visit and the advice. She had arrived before her friend, who texted and asked if she would save a seat. The window swelled with the audience's arrival. Their notes warmed the silence into retreat. She sat very close to the piano stool, very close to the white couple beside her who smiled. Her friend arrived as the lighting changed, and their chatter clicked and fluttered. The improviser's hand rattled the calabash, the room, the rhythms, her voice opening the texture of intentions, the sound of her friend's questions as they drank, listening. It was nothing to wonder at their time together. The tea was still. She needed to text her landlady who had a way with them. It was the only way to get British Gas to come in and out of the house all day with the right parts found at last on Old Kent Road. The scent of her sister's cold shower as she said goodbye, and the tree surgeon's bright ropes in the tree. It was in the can of Coke, hiding in the offer, a look from another girl, warm, who recognized what she could tell. She told many times who she was in the living room, but could never explain. What time had it been when they all laughed again? The white curtains could no longer keep the sunlight out. Bitch, I can tell, so she told, and shared and passed a little plate, and would leave all her decisions for tomorrow. The room of these people heightened. She was not the only girl among strangers, although, again, a girl, passed out in a taxi. The exasperated driver paced up and down parallel. The night wouldn't end. Police arrived and their fingers squeezed the tendons behind the girl's ear. She was in the car and both doors were blocked by police. They had called emergency services, but she shouldn't have been there at all. 2 pills would have done it, but some don't realize what they are concealing in their offer. It was in the national park. She was still wearing her friend's clothes. The cat was asleep on the floor and her friend was waiting for her at the river. She wasn't ready to go. This was the only decision she had made that day, after the flight, and then the train, the dreaming cat, and the hot stone steps. The event fell further into the distance despite its crowded amplification. She wouldn't have been the only girl there, but she wouldn't be there at all. She climbed around and texted her friend back. I've been trying to reach you for like 6 weeks. She pulled her curls out of the drain. Her fingers went into the knuckle. She was another, blurring through the endeavor of the streets. She went there often to look at the consequences of the city, its seeds scattered as windows, different seeds, a sea marked by its setting. She looked down, outfigured again by sun. She went to the Carrefour to find things to go with pasta. The sun stayed up in the living room. The conversations on the edge of the couch, on his knee, in the bedroom. The translations danced from one foot to another. They took another trip to the shop. The girl told her that she had moved from Venezuela, where her somewhere else had been. There was something there that she was not able to miss. The door in question was in the bathroom, in the kitchen. It closed shakily as she entered. She could not sleep before dinner and left early, fingered her pages on the flight. They would not see her here if she stayed, although she had met them. She now understood the brief exchange and what was written on the sign. And her sister. She lay for a while, then reached out. Her lips parted before she could realize what the offer was. Flown through the plane's pages, she went to his flat around the corner. It wasn't far. She could lay there, not a sycamore, but a cedar. The sycamore was to come down later. They had got a letter from the new owners, their characters, the inconvenience standing in their doorway. Her afternoon whispered over the black plastic pepper grinder, lemon and rinsed capers. There was no end to the expense of 2018, its dull expressions of form. They had put a massive gym box in at Elephant and Castle, and there was no end to it. At one time, its huge adjacent billboard read, "The new king of the castle," and where to go from that growth. The expense changed the skyline, the street. It felt impossible to tell. She veered again into the ditch, the cost of her material failures. She had to buy a can of Coke to stay awake, and then back under the shower with him. He left for work at 7. There was another room. There would be another where she could patch things up with failed materials, although she couldn't see it anymore. She had lost sight of it. She couldn't sleep. She didn't sleep for a few days. People did not sleep during the day, and this was not lost on her. It was curled up in her hands, almost blank, veered dully, almost empty. She banged on the door, peered inside the jutting and white architecture. She looked up, she looked away, did not go up the lift. Tall and white, he kept falling into her and laughing in her face, unsweet as she swung on him, but he kept falling, trampling the fennel beneath the feet of her friends. She wouldn't be ashamed. It was better to water the plants at night. She left her room behind and didn't mind if things didn't get done. There were many doves and some pigeons by the time she got back, somewhat blue and soundless, the sky clear of its cedar trees. The flowers drew the eye to the opening of the property. She felt that she shouldn't be looking up at their window. And Elephant and Castle would be a block against the sky, a volume of skied expanse. She remembered the guy she hooked up with. He was staying in a flat somewhere behind LCC. He said he had been wanting a high street put in for ages. She wondered what he thought now. Is this what someone would have wanted in 2014? It seemed to express something else. It seemed aimed at someone else's expression. That flat had been his cousin's. He was crashing there while he tried to find somewhere else in the area of that year. He didn't appear again when she opened Grindr. He may as well have been, although it was no other time. There was one time, in her unimportant drunkenness that had been, she had been through the scale of the apartments and could barely think of walking through the time of their streets. Mec, je t'avais dit qu'on voit les gens drogués ici. Her friend was looking for her again, a sharp turn of wandering, the distorted details of the skyline, an image that had more space in it than there should be from this perspective. Like thistle, but touched the path where a bird had lost some of its feathers. She couldn't recognize the shapes of the leaves webbed closely with dust, the stirring of its wings. The clouds played along before opening out onto what had organized the land and produced the cover of the thistle in the picture. More ground than upending sky, a red that belonged more to fall. It wasn't for her to share its pace. She would need to scatter its berries close to the ground and the plains over the view, and watch things drift over the little pile of cities, the bee very close to her skin. The figures walked over the landscape contoured by the plastic bag that had been molded into the texture of the road by its traffic. A building site was there, the quiet and sharp field of its potential, the developer's bright, unending day, the strong vertical strokes. She took a picture of what was behind her. People have always walked among the trees, that again and again became worth its steps, became worth the again and again of its steps, whose worth became what it meant to set foot on something, on somewhere again, and foot became against the setting of itself, the feet that came again against the setting of ourselves. Incessant heat's idyllic phrase, and again, it could be small, worth the share of its resources. And who was to say what a path was or wasn't? Someone had built an unfinished stair among the breeze, avoiding the route's unnamed nature, and leaving would cast its red shade over airspace, cold and drying to her skin when she had been a child, an access whose meaning she could not escape. The suspense brought her outside relation, too close to the skin. Already the light seemed to be changing the time zone, the fluorescence of its seal, the smell of the milk under the foil. Okay, sorry. As she gets higher, you need to strengthen the ground, that left hand, in firmness. It told its story and grasped what was in her underwear, an unaccompanied urgent evening before she would walk across Burgess Park. She would have to choose. The mess made her late, the smell of the film inside her, and watch what suddenly ended, her small weight, caught in the hair that led up to her navel, its sunlit unsureness and intervals overgrown. She had no idea where the energy would come from, so she closed, legs strong from walking through a concert of smells as warm milk starts to separate. People filmed each other in the sun, a generation of men sitting in the sun of their sound, amplified beneath the trees, the thudding thumbs up of the joggers, the collapsing thistle and the mistake of the sycamore, the melted talking, another car alarm through the leaves. The cloud of birds was false. One man called to another. She woke, and it woke her, loud enough to shake a tree from its place in the sky. The room was barely a bed. Then a window. It would wake her. They liaised with the sound of their chainsaw, the point of their air turned metal, their squawking air. And there beside her sleep shape, she hadn't realized the window had been left open, in the hospital, on the plane, red wine-drunk tears, their warm way of doing things. She continued to sit, to be promised as far as hands would go without weft, and what had been written there she hadn't read, and she would not be drawn to its reading, but in carbon observation. A note. In her sleep, someone had passed her a crumpled piece of yellow paper with something written on it, a sheet of foil flattened onto the road. She walked to boots and it reflected the texture of the road back at her, the flat heat of the environment, the sound of the cat as she walked into her room trekking dry dirt through the house, the shape of its mouth at its opening, thwarted, like the air and its gaps. She walked along the side of the road and travelled at a speed that was not her own across its surface, and knew it very poorly, the mirror reflecting the intersection, an alignment shown to be incapable of interacting, concealed in the composition center, turning its loop. The conversation lingered in tears, holding her aunt's basket, bowing the sisal against itself. It made a sound like talking. Something was unwoven in the afternoon of that room. The glass poured with the felling of the trees at the end of the road. The leaves fled, and the atmosphere rushed to fill in the blue contribution of the sky, to then sink into the bird-lit sky. And then the picture took her against the bird-lit sky. And then the somewhat sun-shaken blue sank in that direction. And then in dizzying, sun-shaken rain took the birds against the edge. The birds at the edge of the trees, in the light of the room, its falling mirror edged by photographs taken by windows, close to the language border. She used to laugh at the sign almost every day on the bus home from school. Zottenburg. Thank you.